Hey everyone! Imagine a king forced to surrender his absolute power, not by a rival army, but by a group of rebellious barons demanding their rights. This is the story of the Magna Carta, a document that not only reshaped the rule of a medieval king, but laid the groundwork for many freedoms we cherish today.
That's right. King John, infamous for his heavy taxes and constant clashes with both nobles and the church, found himself cornered. What followed was a historic agreement that would echo through centuries, influencing legal systems worldwide, and it all happened in a meadow by the River Thames.
Exactly. What makes this story so exciting isn't just the rebellion or the compromises, it's how the Magna Carta became a symbol of liberty and justice. Today, we're diving deep into the drama, the power struggles, and the legacy of one of the most famous documents in history. Let's get started.
Let's go back to the beginning. The roots of the Magna Carta didn't just appear out of nowhere. It all started with William the Conqueror, who invaded England in 1066. When he took over, he made sure he had total control, not just over the land, but also over the nobles and even the church.
Right. And that power didn't just stay with him. His successors, like Henry I, tried to keep the same grip on the country. But here's the twist. Henry knew he couldn't keep everyone happy by force. So, in 1100, he issued the Charter of Liberties. It was a kind of promise to the barons and the church that he wouldn't abuse his power.
That's true, but it wasn't just a friendly gesture, was it? He needed their support, especially since his brother, Robert of Normandy, was challenging his throne. The charter was his way of saying, "Stick with me and I'll treat you fairly."
Exactly. And it set a precedent. Over the next century, kings like Henry II followed a similar path, issuing charters to gain loyalty. These documents promised to respect certain rights, like fair treatment for nobles and the church. But here's the catch. They weren't legally binding.
And that's where the tension started to grow. While the kings were making promises, they were also building stronger systems of government, like better courts and tax systems. The barons? They felt like the rules kept changing in the king's favor.
That's a key point. By the time John came to power, the barons were used to the idea that they should have some say in how things worked. They weren't just going to sit back and let the king do whatever he wanted.
Right? And this balance of power, or lack of it, was the foundation for what would eventually become the Magna Carta. It was all about the struggle to define who held the real authority in England, the king or the people he governed.
Let's talk about King John. He wasn't exactly known for being a popular king, was he? From the moment he took the throne in 1199, things were rocky. For starters, he lost almost all of England's lands in France, including Normandy. That was a huge blow to his reputation.
And it wasn't just about reputation. Losing Normandy meant losing money. Without those lands, John had to squeeze more taxes out of his barons to fund his wars and keep the crown stable. But you can guess how the barons felt about that. They were furious.
Right, and it wasn't only the barons. John's relationship with the church was just as bad. Remember the feud with Pope Innocent III? John refused to accept the Pope's choice for Archbishop of Canterbury, which led to England being placed under a papal interdict for years. No church services, no sacraments. It was chaos.
Exactly. John even got excommunicated, which was a huge deal. It wasn't until 1213 that he patched things up with the Pope. But by then, his barons had lost whatever patience they had left. They were fed up with the taxes, the failed wars, and his constant power grabs.
And let's not forget scutage. That was the money barons paid instead of serving in the king's army. John demanded it more often than any king before him. Imagine paying extra just to avoid going to war, and then finding out the king still wasn't winning.
Exactly. By 1215, the barons had reached their breaking point. They didn't just want lower taxes, they wanted guarantees. They wanted written promises that John would respect their rights and stop acting like he was above the law.
But John wasn't the type to give in easily. At first, he refused to even meet their demands. It wasn't until the barons formed an army and captured London that John realized he had no choice.
That's the moment things really started to shift. The barons were no longer just complaining. They were taking action, and John, for all his stubbornness, had to face the fact that his power wasn't as absolute as he thought.
So, by 1215, the barons had forced John into a corner. But let's not forget, getting him to agree to anything wasn't going to be easy. John was known for being cunning, and he didn't want to give up any of his power.
True, but the barons weren't backing down either. They had Archbishop Stephen Langton on their side, and he played a huge role. Langton wasn't just a religious leader, he was a mediator and strategist. He reminded the barons about Henry I's Charter of Liberties, which promised to protect their rights. That gave them a solid foundation to demand something similar from John.
And they didn't waste any time. In early 1215, they presented John with a list of demands. These demands were later called the Articles of the Barons. Basically, they wanted limits on royal authority and protections for their own rights.
At first, John tried to stall. He even asked the Pope for help, declaring the barons were rebelling against their rightful king. But the barons had already taken control of London, which gave them a huge advantage. John knew he couldn't afford a full-blown civil war.
That's when negotiations started to take shape. The barons, led by powerful figures like William Marshall, demanded that John meet them at Runnymede, a meadow by the River Thames. It wasn't just a peaceful location. It was neutral ground where both sides could negotiate without feeling threatened.
Still, the talks were tense. Many of the barons wanted to fight, not negotiate. They didn't trust John at all, and honestly, who could blame them? But Langton and Marshall worked hard to keep things from falling apart. They convinced the barons that a written agreement would be stronger than a battlefield victory.
And they were right. On June 15, 1215, after months of pressure, John finally agreed to the Articles of the Barons. His seal was set on the document, and from that, the Magna Carta was drafted.
But let's be clear, this wasn't some grand moment of unity. John agreed because he had no choice. For him, it was all about buying time and avoiding immediate conflict. He probably didn't plan to stick to it at all.
Exactly. The Magna Carta was a compromise, not a victory. But it was still a groundbreaking moment. For the first time, a king's power was formally limited by the demands of his subjects. That alone made it revolutionary.
So now we're at the heart of the story. What exactly did the Magna Carta say? I mean, this wasn't just a random list of rules. It was carefully crafted to address the barons' biggest complaints about King John's rule.
Exactly. One of the most famous provisions was about justice. The Magna Carta promised that no free man could be arrested, imprisoned, or punished without a fair trial. Basically, it introduced the idea of due process, which is still a cornerstone of legal systems today.
That clause was huge, but it didn't stop there. The Magna Carta also limited John's ability to raise taxes without the barons' consent. They were tired of being forced to pay for his endless wars and failures without having a say in it.
And let's not forget Clause 61. This one gave the barons the right to form a council to ensure the king followed the agreement. If John broke his promises, the barons could even declare war on him. Can you imagine that? A king agreeing to something like that?
It's wild, but it showed how desperate John was at the time. Clause 61 basically meant the barons didn't trust him at all, which, let's be honest, was fair. John had a long history of going back on his word.
Absolutely. Beyond that, the Magna Carta also addressed other issues, like inheritance rights, protection for widows, and fair treatment for merchants. It wasn't just about the barons. It covered a wide range of people and interests.
But it's important to remember that the Magna Carta wasn't exactly democratic. Most of the population, especially peasants, didn't benefit directly from it. This was a document made by the powerful, for the powerful.
True, but even so, it set a precedent. The idea that a ruler's power could be limited by written laws was groundbreaking. It planted the seed for future legal systems where rights and freedoms became central principles.
Exactly. Even though the Magna Carta didn't solve everything right away, it laid the foundation for something much bigger, a world where no one, not even a king, could be above the law.
So, after the Magna Carta was sealed in 1215, you'd think the story ends there, right? King John gives in, Everyone's happy and life goes on. But that's not what happened at all.
Not even close. For starters, John had no intention of keeping his promises. He probably saw the Magna Carta as a temporary fix, just to stop the barons from rebelling. And as soon as he had the chance, he got the Pope to annul the charter.
Right, and that brought the barons right back to rebellion. Civil war broke out almost immediately. It wasn't until John died in 1216, just a year later, that things started to calm down. His 9-year-old son, Henry III, took the throne, and his advisors knew they needed to make peace.
That's when the Magna Carta was reissued for the first time. In 1216, Henry's council cut it down to just 42 clauses, focusing on the most important issues and leaving out the more controversial parts, like Clause 61. They wanted to show the barons that they were serious about compromise.
And it worked. The barons started to support young Henry, which helped stabilize the kingdom. But that wasn't the end of it. In 1217, the Magna Carta was revised and reissued again. This time, it came with a new document, the Charter of the Forest.
Ah, yes, the Forest Charter. That one addressed how royal forests were managed. It limited the king's control over lands and gave more rights to common people who relied on forests for resources. It was a big deal for ordinary folks, even if the Magna Carta itself mostly benefited the barons.
Exactly. By the time the Magna Carta was reissued again in 1225, it had become a more polished and practical document. Henry III, now older and ruling on his own, confirmed the charter to gain support for raising taxes.
So over time, the Magna Carta wasn't just a document for dealing with King John. It became a tool for defining the balance of power in England. Each revision showed how the charter was evolving to fit the needs of the moment.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. The Magna Carta wasn't static. It adapted with each reissue, shaping the relationship between the king and his subjects in ways no one could have predicted back in 1215.
The Magna Carta might have started as a way to handle King John's mess, but its influence didn't stop there. Over the centuries, it became a symbol of something much bigger: freedom and the rule of law.
Absolutely. Take Clause 39, for example. It said that no free man could be punished or imprisoned without a fair trial. That idea, known as due process, became the foundation for legal systems not just in England, but around the world.
Right? In England, it inspired major reforms. Think about the Petition of Right in 1628 or the Habeas Corpus Act of 1679. Both of them looked back to the Magna Carta as proof that even kings had to respect the law.
And let's not forget its influence on America. The Magna Carta played a big role in shaping the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Even the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection under the law, has roots in the Magna Carta.
It's amazing, isn't it? A document created to stop a medieval king from overreaching ended up becoming a cornerstone for modern democracy. It shows how powerful ideas can evolve and stay relevant for centuries.
True, but I think it's also important to remember the symbolism of the Magna Carta. Over time, it stopped being about the specific clauses and became more about the principles it stood for: justice, fairness, and accountability.
Exactly. Whenever people felt oppressed or unfairly treated, they turned to the Magna Carta as proof that those in power should be held accountable. It became a kind of rallying cry for liberty.
And that's why it's still remembered today. It's not just a dusty old document. It's a reminder that no one, not even the most powerful ruler, is above the law. That idea changed the world.
It really did. The Magna Carta might have been born out of conflict and compromise, but its legacy has inspired countless movements for justice and equality. And that's what makes it so timeless.
So there you have it. The story of the Magna Carta. What started as a desperate agreement between a king and his barons turned into one of the most important documents in history.
Absolutely. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't solve all the problems of its time. But the Magna Carta planted the idea that power has limits and that justice matters. Its legacy still shapes the way we think about rights and fairness today.
And let's not forget its lasting influence on documents like the U.S. Constitution and the idea of due process. From medieval England to modern democracies, the Magna Carta's impact is undeniable.
Now it's your turn. Who would you like us to talk about next? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories from history.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.